You did not choose your cat. Not really. You may have gone to a shelter, or responded to an ad, or found one on your doorstep and decided to keep it. But the decision that made any of that possible was made 10,000 years ago, by humans who had no idea what they were starting, and by cats who were following nothing more complicated than their own self-interest. What happened between humans and cats is one of the strangest stories in the entire history of our species. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is the opposite of dramatic. It crept in quietly, the way cats themselves do, through a side door that nobody was watching, and by the time anyone noticed, it had already changed everything. To understand it, you need to understand what was happening to human beings around 10,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, the region stretching across modern-day Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and the Levant. This was the moment, or more accurately the slow centuries-long process, when human beings stopped moving and started staying. Agriculture was taking hold. People were building permanent settlements, storing grain, watching harvests accumulate in a way that had never been possible before. And grain stores attract rodents. Rodents attract cats. It really may have been that simple. The wildcats of the Near East, Felis sylvestris libica, a small, tawny, striped animal that looks remarkably like a slightly wild-eyed version of the tabby currently sleeping on your sofa, were drawn to human settlements not because they liked humans, but because humans had accidentally created the perfect hunting ground. Dense concentrations of mice and rats, reliable food sources that persisted year-round in ways that the open landscape could not offer. The cats came for the rodents. The humans noticed the cats were handling a serious pest problem. A relationship began. The geneticist Carlos Driscoll and his colleagues published a landmark study in 2007 in the journal Science that traced the domestic cat's ancestry through mitochondrial DNA. What they found confirmed what archaeology had long suggested. All domestic cats descend from a small population of Felis sylvestris libica in the Near East, and the divergence between wild and domestic populations began approximately 10,000 years ago, precisely when and where agriculture was emerging. The cats did not come from multiple wild populations independently. They came from one place, one moment, one unlikely convergence of grain storage and small predators. But here is where the story gets psychologically interesting, because what Driscoll's team also found was that the genetic divergence between wild and domestic cats is remarkably small. Smaller than you would expect from 10,000 years of living alongside humans. Cats are, genetically speaking, barely domesticated at all. Compare them to dogs, whose domestication involved dramatic changes to their social cognition, their ability to read human facial expressions, their fundamental orientation toward cooperation with people. Dogs were shaped by humans over thousands of years into something genuinely different from wolves. Cats largely shaped themselves. The behavioral geneticist Pontus Skoglund at the Francis Crick Institute, whose work on ancient DNA has transformed our understanding of prehistoric human populations, has noted that cats appear to have been selected almost exclusively for tameness, for the willingness to tolerate proximity to humans without fleeing or attacking, rather than for any of the cognitive or behavioral traits that distinguish dogs from wolves. A domestic cat and a wild cat are cognitively almost identical. The domestic cat simply has a higher threshold for tolerating the presence of large, loud, unpredictable primates without treating them as threats, which raises the question that sits at the center of this entire story. Why did humans want them? The pest control explanation is true and important, but it cannot be the whole answer, because pest control does not explain why humans began burying cats alongside themselves. It does not explain why ancient Egyptians elevated the cat to divine status, creating the goddess Batet and making the killing of a cat a crime punishable by death. It does not explain why, across dozens of unconnected cultures and thousands of years, humans consistently moved from tolerating cats in their grain stores to inviting them into their homes, giving them names, mourning them when they died. In 2004, archaeologists working in Cyprus excavated a gravesite at Chilarokambos dating to approximately 9,500 years ago. Buried beside a human skeleton was a small cat, placed deliberately, its body oriented toward the same direction as the humans, suggesting intentional interment rather than coincidence. This predates the famous cat burials of ancient Egypt by more than 4,000 years. Someone, 9,500 years ago, cared enough about a specific cat to bury it with intention and apparent ceremony. That is not pest control. That is something else. To understand what that something else is, you need to understand something about human psychology that evolutionary anthropologists have been studying for decades. Humans are unique among animals in a specific and somewhat peculiar way. They form deep emotional bonds not only with members of their own species, but with members of other species that display certain triggering characteristics. Large eyes relative to the size of the face, round heads, small noses, high-pitched vocalizations, soft textures, dependent, helpless behavior. These characteristics trigger what the ethologist Konrad Lorenz first described in the 1940s as the Kinschenschema, the baby schema, a set of features that activate caregiving and nurturing instincts in humans. Human infants have these features, and cats, especially kittens but even adult cats to a significant degree, also have them. The round face, the large forward-facing eyes, the small nose, the high-pitched meow, which research published in 2009 by Karen McComb at the University of Sussex found had specifically evolved in domestic cats to exploit human auditory preferences, embedding a cry-like frequency within a purring sound that humans find both pleasant and difficult to ignore. The cats did not develop this vocalization to communicate with other cats. Wild cats do not meow at each other beyond kittenhood. The domestic cat meow is a communication system that evolved specifically and entirely to manipulate humans. The cats learned, over thousands of years of living alongside people, that certain sounds produced certain responses. They were not consciously strategizing, but the ones whose vocalizations were most effective at eliciting food and warmth from humans were the ones who survived and reproduced. Evolution did the rest. You are not responding to your cat's meow because you are a good pet owner. You are responding because your cat has spent 10,000 years evolving a sound specifically calibrated to bypass your rational brain and hit your caregiving instincts directly. This is the part of the story that says something uncomfortable and fascinating about us. Because what the human-cat relationship reveals is that the caregiving instincts that evolution built into humans for the protection of human infants are surprisingly easy to redirect. Humans do not only bond with things that are genetically related to them, or that belong to their social group, or that can reciprocate in kind. Humans bond with anything that sufficiently resembles the things that trigger their deepest social and emotional responses. The anthropologist Pat Shipman at Penn State University has argued in her book The Animal Connection that the human tendency to form bonds with other species is not a modern quirk or a byproduct of surplus leisure time. It is one of the oldest and most consistent features of human behavior in the archaeological record. Humans have been forming relationships with animals since before agriculture, since before permanent settlements, since before cats were anywhere near our grain stores. Cave paintings include animals rendered with extraordinary care and attention. Burials include animal remains. Early human sites show evidence of keeping animals alive rather than eating them immediately, which suggests something beyond purely nutritional interest. Shipman argues that what she calls the animal connection was actually a cognitive driver of human evolution itself, that the ability to observe, model, and eventually form relationships with other species gave early humans a competitive advantage. Understanding animal behavior in extraordinary detail helped hunters. Forming working relationships with animals, as eventually happened with dogs first and then with many other species, extended human capabilities in ways that purely technological solutions could not. The cat fits into this pattern, but with an interesting twist. Every other domesticated animal that humans live with was domesticated primarily because humans found it useful in ways that could be directed and controlled. Dogs for hunting, herding, and protection. Horses for transport and warfare. Cattle, sheep, and pigs for food. Even birds were domesticated for eggs, meat, and in some cases communication. The utility was clear, and the domestication process reflected that clarity. Humans selectively bred these animals for traits that made them more useful in specific human-defined ways. Cats were different. Cats were never bred for specific tasks in the same deliberate way. They were never herded, or trained to perform complex functions, or selectively modified to serve particular human purposes in any systematic fashion. They simply continued doing what they had always done, hunting small prey, and humans continued allowing and then encouraging their presence for reasons that were only partly practical. The ancient Egyptians took this further than anyone. By around 4,000 years ago, cats had moved from useful pest controllers to sacred animals, associated with the goddess Batet, protector of the home, of women, and of the pharaoh himself. Killing a cat, even accidentally, could result in death. When a household cat died, family members shaved their eyebrows as a mark of mourning. Cats were mummified by the millions and offered at temples. An entire city, Bubastis, was dedicated to their worship. What produced this extraordinary elevation? The historian and classicist Richard Jasnow at Johns Hopkins University has suggested that the Egyptian veneration of cats was connected to their role as protectors against snakes and scorpions, genuine threats in the agricultural communities of the Nile Delta, as well as their association with the sun god Ra through their reflective eyes, which were seen as capturing and holding light. But the practical explanations, as with the pest control theory, do not fully account for the emotional intensity of the relationship. The Egyptians did not merely appreciate cats. They loved them with an expressiveness that looks, across 4,000 years of cultural distance, remarkably familiar. The Roman author Diodorus Siculus, writing in the 1st century BC, recorded witnessing an incident in which a Roman soldier accidentally killed a cat in Egypt and was torn apart by an angry crowd despite the intervention of Egyptian authorities who were genuinely trying to protect him. The pharaoh himself sent representatives to attempt to prevent the killing, but the crowd could not be restrained. A casual traveler had killed a cat, and the Egyptian population responded with lethal collective fury. This was not a legal calculation. It was grief expressed as rage. Something about the cat had gotten inside the human emotional system in a way that resisted purely rational explanation. And 10,000 years of evolution, both the cat's and ours, had made that outcome almost inevitable. Today there are an estimated 600 million domestic cats on Earth. They live on every continent except Antarctica. They have entered human homes, human beds, human social media, human grief. People mourn their cats the way they mourn family members. Research published in the journal PLOS One found that the bond between a cat owner and their cat activates many of the same neurological pathways as human-to-human social bonding. The attachment is not metaphorical. It is biological. None of this was planned. No human being 10,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent decided to domesticate the cat. No committee of Neolithic farmers sat down and chose to begin a 10,000-year relationship that would eventually produce 600 million animals living in human homes worldwide. What happened was stranger and more human than any plan could have been. A small wild animal followed its self-interest into a human settlement. A human being noticed it and felt something. And that something, whatever it was, that flicker of interest or warmth or recognition across the species boundary, turned out to be one of the most durable things our species has ever felt. You did not choose your cat. Your ancestors did. Thousands of years ago, before anyone had words for what they were doing, they looked at a small wild animal with large eyes and a sound calibrated to reach directly into the human heart, and they decided, without deciding, to let it stay. And here you are.